a warm welcome to all of you. And then we are very happy that we have here Dr. Michael Williams, and he's a wonderful philosopher who's based in something. Hello?
Krishna has to mute himself.
Okay. Sorry for that. He's a wonderful philosopher, especially working in the field of Indian philosophy, that to the toughest part, Nyaya and Nyāyāmṛta, realism, Advaita Vedānta is his specialization, especially as far as my knowledge goes. And then we are very happy to invite you, Michael, and then looking forward to hear your talk. Yeah. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Okay, it's great to be with you here today. It's 5 a.m. in Vienna, actually, so I got some coffee and yeah. But thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm that's just to add. I'm actually based at the Austrian Academy of Sciences, so I'm speaking here from Vienna. As been said, my major focus of my research is Mādhva Vedānta, and particularly the intersection between Mādhva Vedānta and Navya Nyaya. So looking primarily, the projects I'm working on at the moment is mainly based around the study of Vyāsatīrtha's thought, the influence of him over him by Gangesha Upadhyaya and Maithil commentators on the Tarkatandava. So today I will be talking primarily about the Mādhva tradition. So in case people, I guess most people will have background, but I'm just going to say it anyway, just to be clear. So the tradition, the Mādhva tradition, was founded in the 13th century by Madhvacharya, or Mādhva as is usually known, also known in India, particularly as Anandatīrtha. And it's also known, of course, as Dvaita or dualistic Vedanta. So the main enemies of the Mādhva Vedantins were from the start the Advaita Vedantins. So Mādhva himself was actually, he was probably, as far as we're aware, a member of something called the Bhagavata Sampradaya. And the Bhagavata Sampradaya really took the philosophy of Shankaracharya, of the Shankara Advaita tradition, as its core philosophical views. And Mādhva was originally trained in Advaita Vedanta philosophy, particularly in the Sumadhva Vijaya. We read that he was trained in the Ishta Siddhi of Vimuktatman, but he completely rejected it. And went on to found his own tradition based around bhakti, or devotion to Vishnu Narayana. Okay, so today, today I'm going to be talking mainly about about Jayatīrtha actually in this tradition. So the research focus at the moment in Vienna is on Vyāsatīrtha, who lived in the 15th to the 16th century. And also the people who Vyāsatīrtha influenced, so including Satyanatha-tīrtha, Hulugi, Shripati-acharya, and various other people in the Mādhva tradition. But today I want to talk primarily about Jayatīrtha. So Jayatīrtha was Mādhva's leading commentator in the Mādhva tradition. So he wrote commentaries on basically all the works of Madhvacharya. And a particularly important commentary that he wrote is called the Nyāyasudhā. So the Nyāyasudhā is actually a commentary on the Anuvyākhyāna of Mādhva. The Anuvyākhyāna itself is a metrical commentary on the Brahma Sutras. It was the second of Mādhva's major commentaries on the Brahma Sutras. And one of the central things this text is interested in is the concept of perceptual illusion. So perceptual illusion was really central, as you know, to discussions in philosophical discussions in India, also to discussions about metaphysics and the nature of reality and the relationship between thought and reality. And Jayatīrtha, as I'll describe in this talk, wrote really a classic, one of the best, I feel, discussions of perceptual illusion in Indian philosophy. And it was probably based, I'll discuss this as well, on the Vachaspati Mishra's commentary on the Nyāyāmṛta, so the Nyāyāmṛta Tattvavāda Tika. Okay. Yeah, so I, just to let you know before I get into the philosophy, this is based partly on my work in my recently published book, which is called Existence and Perception in Medieval Vedānta, Vyāsatīrtha's Defense of Realism in the Nyāyāmṛta. And it's been published by Advaita, and if you want to download it or read it, it's actually completely free. It's available as a PDF for free simply because this is funded by the Austrian science funds, the FWF. And in that book, actually, I look at mainly at Vyāsatīrtha, but there's a lot of background in Jayatīrtha as well. Okay, so to come back to the Nyāyāmṛta. So the Nyāyāmṛta is Vyāsatīrtha's critique of Advaita philosophy. And I think that primarily the Mādhvas are drawn into questions about perceptual illusion through their engagement with Advaita philosophy. And so the Advaitins advocate something that we could call a generalized anti or non-realism about the world. The world of our experience. So they hold that world of our experience is it's called anirvachaniyatva. The world of our experience is neither existent nor non-existent. The standard definition you get in the Nyāyāmṛta is saddha sattva anadhikaranatva, being the locus of neither existence or non-existence. And the Mādhvas really are drawn into the questions of perceptual illusion, I would say primarily through their critique of this Advaita view, particularly the view of anirvachaniyatva. So Mādhva himself wrote, extensive critique of this view. You get it, particularly in the Vyakhana, in his Dasha Prakaranas, and also in his Vishnu Tattva Nirnaya, for example. And the main Mādhva critique of this, and this is something that's going to be very important for the later philosophy, is that we can become aware of things that are non-existent. So things that are non-existent, I mean ati anta asat, things that simply do not exist at all. The standard examples are the Shashashunga, the hare's horn, the Vandhyasutta, the son of a barren woman, things that either cannot or simply do not exist. And Mādhva argued, contrary to the Advaitins, that we can experience non-existent things. We can have cognitions such as, for example, Shashavishanam asat. The hare's horn does not exist. Shashavishanam atyanta asat. The hare's horn is completely non-existent. And this sets the basis for the entire Mādhva theory of error, and it also sets them apart from the other traditions of philosophy in India, particularly the Naiyāyikas and the Advaita Vedāntins. We can know that, essentially what they argue is that the object of perceptual illusions, which I'll talk about in a second, is completely non-existent. Interestingly, they also, because I think this is a very interesting, philosophical point, the Mādhvas also believe we can make inferences about non-existent things. So, for example, we can infer that Vandhyasutta na vakta acchetanatvat. So the son of a barren woman cannot speak, it is mute, because it is insentient, acchetanatvat. So we can not only make true awarenesses about non-existent things, we can actually make inferences about them that are valid. Okay, so let's get to perceptual error now. So by perceptual error, I mean any case where in a perceptual content we mistake one thing for another or attribute some property to something that really lacks it. For example, the standard example in all Indian philosophical texts, which you'll no doubt be familiar with, is where we mistake a piece of mother of pearl, a piece of shell really, for a piece of silver. So we're going along, we look down, we see this piece of mother of pearl, and we have the thought, this is silver. And this causes us to reach down to pick it up, only to be disappointed and find out in what is called the sublating awareness that it is simply a worthless piece of mother of pearl. And there are many. I mean, one of the interesting things about the later tradition is that they really fall back on this example constantly. So actually, in the earlier tradition, for example, in the works of Shankara, you get very detailed discussions of other types of perceptual illusion. But in these later texts, and by the time of Jayatīrtha and Mādhva, this error, this type of error, this misidentificational type of error, becomes considered to be paradigmatic. Okay, so today I mainly want to talk about the Mādhva and the Nyaya theories, but I also want to talk about first about the Prābhākara theory of so-called perceptual illusion. I say so-called because the Prābhākaras deny that there is actually illusion in the way that I've just described it. So Jayatīrtha in the Nyāyasudhā gives a very extensive treatment of the different theories of perceptual illusion in Indian philosophy. And this is called the Panchākhyātivāda section of the text. It's rightly regarded in the Mādhva tradition particularly as a classic treatment of perceptual illusion. It's extremely comprehensive. It looks at the views of the different Buddhist schools. So you get the so-called Shunyavadins or nihilists, and also the Vijñānavadins. So it's kind of loosely based on the philosophy of Dharmakirti.
Just a second. But
Yep.
is in hand. Varun, is this something you want to?
Michael, can I ask a clarificatory question?
Yeah.
Just so that I can get the flow of it. Why would Mādhva philosophy's metaphysics or ontology would want non-existence of imaginary things don't exist, right? And that is the larger premise that they are working with. Why would the metaphysics would demand that?
It's an interesting question. I mean, so I didn't go into too much detail there, but it's based on the works of, it's based on the reaction to the philosophy of the Advaita Vedāntins. So the Advaita Vedāntins say, asachet, so when they're arguing for indeterminacy, so indeterminacy is the theory that there is something is neither existent nor non-existent. And when they're arguing for this, in the case of perceptual illusion, Advaitin philosophers argue, asachet na pratyeta. So if the silver in the perceptual illusion were non-existent, we couldn't experience it. So it is core to the Advaitins that, at least in some sense, we cannot detect or become acquainted with something that doesn't exist. And one of Mādhva's arguments against this, he argues as a kind of master argument, and he says that if you deny this, you're just contradicting yourself. If I say, I cannot experience the Shashashrunga, the hare's horn, then I'm contradicting myself because I must have an experience of it, cognition involving it in order to, speak about it at all. So this is what it really goes back to. Okay.
Thanks.
Just one thing I wanted to add, that it's not about Shashashrunga existing, right? It's about you can experience it. They wouldn't say it exists.
No.
They would say you can experience it because it's any non-existent. It is asat. But you can experience it.
No, I completely agree with that, and it's a very important point. Sharma made this point because a lot of philosophers in India who were writing on the Mādhvas, they made this mistake of saying, okay, so in some sense it's like, I don't know, Meinung or something, in some sense this is actually part of reality for the Mādhvas. Perhaps it absists or something, but the Mādhvas don't say that. They're very clear, and it is, as you say, just a matter. What they're denying is that it will, what they're denying is that we can experience it.
Yeah.
Okay?
Thanks, Michael. Sorry
Okay.
for pausing you and
No
asking
problem.
this
Yeah,
question.
yeah, it's a very important clarification. Okay. So Jayatīrtha's Nyāyasudhā is really a classic discussion of perceptual illusion. One of the things that I'm working on at the moment, I didn't really get to writing about it in the book, but is the extent to which this chapter is actually based on the works of Vachaspati Mishra. You know, and as I say in his Nyaya Vartika Tattvavāda Tika, his Prachina Nyaya commentary on ultimately on the Gautama Sutras. And I think what Jayatīrtha does is to take this text of Vachaspati, to really to use it, to reuse it, and to turn it into a defense of the Mādhva theory of perceptual illusion. Which is, as Jayatīrtha has it, a kind of twist, a kind of slight modification of the Naiyāyikas' own theory of illusion. But both the Mādhvas and the Naiyāyikas have to argue against the Prābhākaras. So both the Mādhvas and the Nyāyāyikas argue that there is illusion as such. So there is true illusion. There are cases where we simply recognize something as being other than it actually is. Both the Mādhvas and the Nyāyāyikas actually argue for that. The Prābhākaras argue against this point. And they're one of Jayatīrtha's main antagonists in the Nyāyasudhā. And actually he spends probably, I would say, the majority of the Nyāyasudhā arguing against the Prābhākara position. And so I'll read you something from my own translation of Jayatīrtha's reconstruction of the Prābhākara view. And as I say, this is to a large extent based on Vachaspati Mishra. So Jayatīrtha says, we, the Prābhākaras, say as follows. The judgment, this is silver, actually comprises two cognitions, one of which is a memory and the other an immediate experience. Of those two cognitions, the cognition of this consists in the apprehension merely of a proximate substance, that is, the mother of pearl. For, under the influence of a fault in the perceptual faculties, the victim of the error fails to apprehend a particular universal that is really present in that substance, and this universal is mother of pearlhood, Shuktitva. So for the Prābhākaras, illusion is failure, essentially failure to cognize reality in its wholeness. You know, you approach the mother of pearl, you look down on it, and for some reason, a fault in your perceptual faculties stops you from realizing that it actually has the natural kind, the universal mother of pearlhood. This isn't the end of the story. This is, for the Prābhākaras, this also goes on to produce another fault, which explains why we really truly become mistaken about the mother of pearl. So Jayatīrtha continues. Just the bare substance having been apprehended, it produces a recollection of silver by invoking a mental impression of silver, owing to the similarity of mother of pearl to silver. And even though the recollection of silver consists in the apprehension of something that has already been apprehended, a further fault conceals one part of that recollection of silver, its characters being a recollection, and the recollection comes to resemble a direct experience of the silver. So essentially this, when we just look down and we see this glittering object, it produces a mental recollection of silver in us. Unfortunately, due to another defect, so there are two defects that work in the Prābhākara position, we fail to recognize that this is actually a recollection or memory and not a direct experience. And both of these faults, both of these failures to recognize something on our part, lead us to get the idea that we put this part of the awareness and the mother of pearl recollection together. So we say falsely this is mother of pearl. This is why we engage in erroneous activity, vyāvahāra. We reach down to pick it up and so on. So the Prābhākara view is one of the main aims of the Prābhākara view, as I understand it, is to defend realism. So as in Western philosophy, for Indian philosophers, perceptual illusions have very important consequences for metaphysical questions. So obviously the Prābhākaras, the Naiyāyikas, both of them want to defend realism, a realist view of reality, against anti-realist traditions or non-realist traditions, such as the Buddhists and the Advaita Vedāntins. What is key to the Prābhākara treatment of illusion is that there is no question of us having a so-called nirālambana awareness. So a nirālambana awareness is one where we perceive something that strictly isn't there. So an awareness that simply lacks a basis, an object in the world to which it corresponds. So the Nyāyikas also want to accomplish this with their theory, even though it's questionable as to whether they do. The Mādvas, on the other hand, seize the hare by the horns and actually argue that we simply can have nirālambana awarenesses in some sense. Although they still maintain, of course, that realism is entirely defensible. They are, of course, a staunchly realist tradition. Okay, so having given the Prābhākara review, I want to turn now to the Jayatīrtha's reconstruction of the Nyāya theory of error. So unlike the Prābhākaras, the Naiyāyikas actually believe that we can miscognize or misidentify, perhaps is better, the mother of pearl. And their theory is actually known as abhinavānyathākhyātivāda. So the doctrine of, in one way, misidentification. And Jayatīrtha labels his own theory abhinavānyathākhyātivāda. So abhinav obviously means new, neo. So he identifies his own theory as a kind of twist on the Naiyāyikas theory. And he actually gives it his name himself, by the way. So this abhinavānyathākhyātivāda is a word that's chosen particularly by Jayatīrtha. Okay, so... And this is partly, so I think Jayatīrtha does this partly to overcome a certain problem, which is, why isn't the Mādhva theory of error the same as the Shunyavādins? So far as Indian philosophers in this period are concerned, you have, one of the Buddhist traditions called Shunyavādins, or nihilists. And according to the nihilist, the world of our experience, as well as the illusions that we experience, are completely non-existent. The Mādvas also kind of argue for this theory, but Jayatīrtha, tries to make the Mādhva theory more like the Nyāya theory of illusion. And this is one way of responding to this charge that the Mādvas are actually Shunyavādins in disguise. So the Nyāya theory of error, which the Mādhva theory of error is based on, is perhaps the most intuitive of the different theories of error in Indian philosophy. We see the mother of pearl, and for various reasons we simply misidentify it as being silver. So according to Jayatīrtha, there are actually two versions of this theory. So this is a very controversial topic. Jayatīrtha reconstructs the Nyāya theory as having two subversions. Whether there are two subversions or what the Prachina Naiyāyikas actually make of this, I think, is a subject that needs to be studied more carefully. But certainly Jayatīrtha believes that there are two kinds of Nyāya theories of illusion. And according to the first theory, we identify the mother of pearl with a piece of silver, a particular piece of silver. So according to this, the illusion is a matter of individuals. So there's an individual piece of mother of pearl, and we identify it with an individual piece of silver. The second theory is that we attribute the natural kind silverhood to the mother of pearl. So there are slightly different theories, but I think this has very important consequences for Jayatīrtha's theory, or how Jayatīrtha built his own theory of perceptual illusion. And actually, Jayatīrtha tends to assume that one is the first of these is the theory of the Naiyāyikas. And as I say in this theory, so according to him, the Nyāyāyikas believe mainly that it's a matter of individuals. We identify the mother of pearl with a particular piece of silver that is not identical with. Okay, so coming to Jayatīrtha's own theory, he says, as I say, so the main difference with the Nyāyāyikas is that the silver, the rajatam that we misperceive in this awareness is actually atyanta asat. It's completely non-existent. So Jayatīrtha is very clear about that. Mādhva in the Vishnu Tattva Nirnaya is perhaps not so forthright about that, but Jayatīrtha uses this word atyanta asat to emphasize it just does not exist. So this piece of silver just doesn't exist. And so the Nyāyāyikas, by contrast, try to make it, as the Prābhākaras did, try to make it that all the components of the illusion can be traced back to some component of reality. So the silver, obviously the mother of pearl exists, that much is clear. But they also argue that the different other component of the illusion, the silverhood, is an actual existing piece of reality. Of course, they recognize it as Nyāyikas as a natural kind or as a universal. And so they argue that the different components of the illusion are actually based on, the different components of the illusion are all traceable back to some part of reality. And again, this stops us from having the problem of niralambana, or supportless awarenesses, which seems to threaten realist metaphysics. Okay, so the Mādhvas, by contrast to the Nyāyikas, do not have a problem with the idea that we can cognize non-existent things. So I'll just read a statement out from Jayatīrtha to show the way he argues for this in the Nyāyasudhā. So I translate it as follows. Does the statement, there is a horn on the man's head, bring about a cognition in the person who hears it or not? If you say it does bring about a cognition, then does the cognition which it gives rise to have something which is existent for its object or something which is non-existent? It cannot be the first, since then it will not be liable to sublation. And you cannot, and this is the key to it, so he says, and you cannot claim that the statement in question does not bring about a cognition, since this is contrary to our experience. Moreover, the following inference proves that the statement must be meaningful. The words which are under dispute, the words being there is a horn on the man's head, produce a cognition conforming to their own meaning, since they are words possessed of syntactic expectancy and temporal proximity, just like the sentence, fetch the cow. So this is a bit, of a naughty passage in many ways, but the key to Jayatīrtha's argument is first that, okay, when we, if I tell you there is a Shashashrunga, there's the son of a barren woman, that statement is going to bring about a verbal awareness in you. So you're going to become aware of something, it's just a matter of experience. And, that very fact shows that you can, in some sense, have awarenesses of non-existent things. And as I say, Mādhva's own master argument was that, it's inescapable. If you want to make statements like Shashashrunga Masat, the hare's horn is non-existent, then you have to have a cognition of the hare's horn in the first place. But this still leads to a problem in the context of perceptual illusion. So actually, the Advaitins who are responding to this argument, actually Chitsuka in the Tattvavāda concedes, okay, maybe we can have some kind of an awareness of non-existent things. And he says maybe we can have some kind of a verbal awareness of them. So if I make statements about non-existent things, sure, this can generate awarenesses about them. What we can't have are perceptual-like or perception-like awarenesses of them. So we may be able to have some verbal awareness, but in the context of perceptual illusion, what we're actually having is an awareness that looks and feels like perception to us, to the point where we actually mistake it for a real perception. And Chitsuka and the Advaitins argue that it's still impossible for us to have this kind of perception-like or aparoksha awareness of this. So the underlying problem, so Jayatīrtha actually picks up this discussion in his Tattvavāda, which is another text besides the Nyāyasudhā that contains a lot of his most important work on perceptual illusion. And the underlying problem, as Jayatīrtha sees it in the Tattvavāda, is how can the sense faculties come into contact with something that is completely non-existent? Surely perceptual awarenesses must be produced by them, by the sense faculties. So, okay, so in order to normally have a veridical perception, a true perception, what do we need? Well, the primary, for both the Naiyāyikas and the Mādhvas agree that the primary means that produces perceptual knowledge is indriyartha sannikarsha in some form. So the connection of the sense faculties and the object, the indriyartha sannikarsha. So, and the underlying assumption is that if we have a perception-like awareness, it must be produced by some factors that are similar to the factors that produce normal or veridical perceptual awarenesses. So, and that is, if that's the contact with the sense faculty, then how is this possible in perceptual illusion? You know, how can my sense faculty, it's my visual faculty in this you know, the old example of the silver mother of pearl confusion, how can my sense faculties come into contact with something that simply doesn't exist? It's impossible. And this is the basis of the, you know, one of the main strands of argument against the Mādhvas. Okay, so I'll just get to the Mādhva theory now. So I'll give you, this is actually Vyāsatīrtha's summary of Jayatīrtha's position. I don't want to give Jayatīrtha's position because he develops it over, you know, a long process of argumentation. And Vyāsatīrtha gives a summary of it in the Nyāyāmṛta, which I think is a very accurate summary of Jayatīrtha's theory. So he says, therefore, since the Advaitin's position of anirvachaniya khyati is untenable, our misidentification, anyathakyati theory, is the only tenable option. And he now gives a description of his theory. According to this theory, a flawed sense faculty, being influenced by a recollected impression of silver, apprehends this portion of the cognition, that is the mother of pearl, which is connected with the flawed sense organ, as a completely non-existent piece of silver. So just to unpack what he's saying there. So I come and I see this mother of pearl. So my sense faculties are indeed in contact with some existent object. And this is the mother of pearl. So the mother of pearl serves itself as the alambana, or the objective basis of the awareness and the sense faculties. Vyāsatīrtha's point is that the fault in the perceptual processes, he actually says it's a fault afflicting the indriya itself, somehow causes the indriya to give rise to a cognition of silver. This piece of silver, according to Vyāsatīrtha and according to Jayatīrtha, is atyanta asat. It simply doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in the immediate situation, and it doesn't exist remotely. So some Naiyāyikas apparently argued that this is one version of the Nyaya theory, is that, okay, the silver might not exist here now, but in some sense, you know, our perceptual faculties must be in contact either with the silver hood or with a remotely existing piece of silver. But Jayatīrtha says that the silver simply doesn't exist at all. But his argument is that the particular piece of silver that I'm seeing in the awareness doesn't actually exist at all. There are of course other pieces of silver existing elsewhere, but the particular piece of silver, he argues, that I see in this illusion simply is non-existent. So this obviously in itself presents its own challenges. And one of the major challenges, that I discussed in the book is the case of what Matilal called imaginative illusions. So Matilal, in his work Perceptual, an essay on the classical Indian theories of knowledge, distinguished between, as I say, imaginative illusions and objective illusions. So objective illusions are the simplest of the kinds of illusions. Objective illusions are simply cases where, for example, I have a jaundiced eye and I misperceive this white wall as being yellow. Imaginative illusions, Matilal says, rely on the collateral data accrued by the subject of the illusion. So these are cases where I misidentify, for example, a post in the distance as being a man. What's key to this distinction is that in order to misidentify a post as a man, I have to be aware of a man in the first place. I have to be acquainted with the natural kind or all the individual's man. I can't just, it relies on my collateral data, my recollections. So the question is, how does Jayatīrtha's theory deal with this imaginative illusions? And the mother of pearl silverhood confusion is itself an example of an imaginative illusions. I need to be acquainted with silver in order to mistake the mother of pearl for it. So Jayatīrtha's way of explaining this in short is that we still need to be acquainted with silver, but the silver merely that we're acquainted with, the apanasta rupya, for example, the silver in the silversmith's shop, is only a prototype. So he uses the term pradhana. So the idea is that even though we're not experiencing a particular piece of silver that we've already experienced in the mother of pearl silver illusion, we must have already had an experience of silver at an earlier point in time, and the silver that we've experienced serves as a prototype for the particular silver that we experience in the illusion. And so, so this is Jayatīrtha's way of saying, yes, we need to have recollections involved in the error. We need to recall a particular piece of silver, but that doesn't mean that the particular piece of silver exists. It simply doesn't. It's atyanta asat. But it's inspired, it's kind of a cognitive fiction inspired by our experiences of an earlier piece of silver. So yeah, that is my reconstruction of Jayatīrtha's theory. And as I say, I give quite a detailed discussion of it in the book. So actually, I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And just to kind of make it a bit more clear. So the difference between, yes, the Nyaya theory of this perceptual illusion thinks that the silver which we perceive is real. It's just the case that it is not there in that the place where we are actually perceiving it for that moment, isn't it? So
Yeah.
So the difference of Jayatīrtha is that, so Jayatīrtha is saying that no, that silver, whatever we perceive that the illusionary silver, it doesn't exist anywhere. It is something which is completely different from any silver, pieces of silver, whichever we can see in the world. But it is not a universal, is it? It's
No.
not silver code.
Yeah, that's a very important point. So Jayatīrtha and the Mādhvas, they reject the existence of universals. So this is something that it surprised me when I first read about them, because they're well known as one of India's hardcore realist traditions of philosophy.
Yes.
Yet they're not realists about universals. And what I mean by that is anugata jater abhavat. So there's no recurrent property. There is no such thing as a recurrent property. And they reject this, and they explain why we group things together as being based on sadrishya, on the similarity of these different things. And it's important to emphasize, because people sometimes misunderstand this when I say it, but sadrishya itself is objective. It's an actual part of the real world. So things have an innate similarity to each other, and we detect that. And that's how we explain all this. But certainly there is there's no concept of a recurrent or repeatable property. And I think, this is part of the reason why the Mādhvas perhaps think of perceptual illusions mainly in terms of individuals rather than in terms of universals. So as you say, in the Nyaya position, probably the one that I've most heard, I most strongly associate with the Naiyāyikas, is that the silverhood is a natural kind, a universal that gets attributed to the individual mother of pearl. Jayatīrtha accepts that there is that version of the Nyaya theory, but he prefers to think of it in terms of individuals. So you end up with this kind of perhaps not so plausible sounding remote existence assumption. The idea that there is this remote piece of silver in the silver top is spatially and temporally remote. And somehow my sense faculties are in connection with it. And but Jayatīrtha says, the remote existence of the silver is important, but only insofar as it provides a prototype, a pradhana for this fictional piece of silver that I'm seeing in my mind.
Okay. Yes, thank you. And Krishnaswamy and Varuna, I'll just make the discussion. Hello,
Can you hear me? Yeah.
I can.
Should I go first or?
Krishna, yes, please.
Yeah, okay. Hi.
Right.
Thank you very much for that talk. I just, I don't have a question as much as a comment, which is that, or rather, it is a question actually, which is, have you looked at the work of Anna Fernikova, who presents an argument for perceiving absences? Not, she has a very solid account of how, she looks at it from a perceptual and cognitive perspective, philosophy of mind, but I just wanted to kind of see, refer that to you if you get the time. So she has an interesting argument for how you can perceive absences, which is interesting. Now that said, that's all I had to say as of now. But maybe I'll come back to my if I have a question later. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I haven't come across her work in particular. What was her name again? Sorry, I didn't completely.
Anna Fernikova. So maybe I'll type
Anna
it.
Fernikova. Okay.
Yeah, I'll type it.
Yeah, that's great. No, I'm interested in these questions. It's so for both the Mādhvas and the Naiyāyikas argue obviously that we can perceive absences. So when the term for absence I'm using there is abhava.
Yeah.
So they both argue that. It's important to note that abhava and asat are distinct concepts in Indian, in Mādhva and Nyāya traditions. So what is completely non-existent is something that we can perceive absences, and but what the Mādhvas are saying is even more controversial, perhaps, because they're saying that we can perceive things that completely don't exist, don't exist at all. So for the Mādhvas and the Naiyāyikas, absences are a part of reality. The absence of an elephant on this table in front of me is actually a part
Yeah,
of
that's exactly what Fednikova is saying. So you can
Mhm.
perceive the absent laptop on your table.
Definitely.
So
I think
anyway, yeah. So that's an interesting argument. She pretty much says what Vyāsatīrtha, I suppose, is also trying to say.
Okay, excellent. Well, that sounds interesting.
Should I go?
Yeah, Varun. I
No,
just wanted to add
please.
something
Yeah.
to Krishna's this thing. So Krishna, as far as Michael mentioned, so these Indian philosophers definitely make a clear distinction between something which a thing which exists somewhere, and then you just perceive the absence of that thing in some other locus, and something which you never perceived anywhere in your life, like Shashashranga, and then whether that can be experienced, if not perceived, but experienced. So I think that's where.
Oh, I see. I mean, just let me get it clarified. So the son of a barren woman, or it looks like it's impossible, at least.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is impossible.
Yeah.
It never
So
existed anywhere.
So they're saying that you can perceive that as well?
Yes, according to like how Michael is explaining it, that this, which is like a son of a barren woman, is still kind of an experience. Maybe you are not perceiving it, but then you're experiencing it. So that's where Mādhva's become very, I don't know, I think it kind of goes, if I'm right, somewhere near this Mīmāṃsakas concept of subsistence and existence. So in that way, something which doesn't physically we can, somewhere perceive outside or infer, but still as a thought, if it exists, it exists. So the Mādhvas would say that it is asat. I mean, it is not, they are not saying that it exists outside, but then it can be experienced still.
It can be experienced and can be perceived, or it can be internally perceived. Is that what you mean?
Can be internally perceived.
Ah, I see. So that could go for contradictory statements. I mean, a married bachelor, and so on and so forth.
Yes, I think it should lead that way.
I mean, I think that now coming to think, I mean, this has never come up before, but I guess with, the Shashashranga is the main example they use. And it's kind of possible to imagine in that way that somebody could make that mistake. So Vyāsatīrtha in the Nyāyāmṛta gives the example of a child, so a naive child who doesn't know that hares can have horns. And then somebody comes to him and lies and says, I saw this hare with a horn the other day hopping about. And then Vyāsatīrtha says, well, surely that kid is going to have an awareness of a hare's horn. It's a false awareness, but surely the kid, can have an awareness of a hare's horn. And in fact, the child might even go out and try to find the hare's horn in reality. So they would act on the basis of it.
One case of improbable things like
exactly.
But I mean, impossible things like
this is what I was going to say.
It's impossible things like a married bachelor or the son of a barren woman. Would that also be something that you can perceive? Or are they experienced other?
They don't give a definitive remark on this. I mean, partly because they don't distinguish so sharply between impossible entities and just accidental, non-existent. They tend to lump them together. So I don't know. I mean, so certainly for Vyāsatīrtha, we can make inferences about impossible things. So we could say, for example, the son of a barren woman, Nyāyasudhā, Navakta, is mute, cannot speak, achetanatvāt, because he's insentient. So that's valid. As to whether we can have perception-like awarenesses of them, I think that's more complicated. I mean, we can imagine this kid, for example, having awareness of a Shashashranga, the hare's horn, but can we imagine them, a square circle or something? I mean, maybe in the square circle, yeah.
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 Yeah. Oh, anyway, yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah, please, Varun.
Hi, Michael. I will start
Hi there.
from the last conversation that was happening, discussion happening. Can you clarify? One of the things that I was getting stuck in the last discussion was the distinction between probably cognitive awareness and perception. I mean, so if there is a distinction that Madhavas are trying to do, Jayatīrtha and others are trying to do between these two, then the reality claim is at the cognition level or at the perception level? I mean, probably it might be a very weird question, but that is what I could gather from the last discussion.
Yeah, I mean, so the cognition, so, they distinguish in these texts between jnana, which is awareness or cognition, and perception. So perception is a subtype of just cognition. So you have bare cognitions, which can be perceptual, inferential, verbal, false,
Correct.
true. You can have all these different types of cognitions, but perceptual awareness it's usually defined in realist traditions as one that's it's an awareness that's produced by the contact between the contact between the sense faculty and some object. So there's a very sharp distinction between between cognition in general on the one hand and perceptual cognition on the other hand in particular. So I think the really controversial thing the Mādhavas say from the point of view of the Advaitins and the Naiyāyikas is that we can have perception-like awarenesses, aparoksha awarenesses of things that are completely non-existent. Yeah, I mean, the assumption, that's made in the argument is that, okay, if something resembles a perceptual awareness, then it must be produced by the similar conditions to those which normally produce perceptual awareness. So there must be some sort of contact between the faculty and the sense object. And, if something doesn't exist, how can there be such a connection? There just can't, And this is the really controversial thing the Mādhavas say. But as I say, they do believe it is produced by the sense faculties, but the sense faculties malfunction in this case and create this kind of illusion of,
So thanks for clarifying that. Because then, see, I mean, of course, your talk was very detailed and it was very difficult to follow the genealogy and all the things that you were saying. Okay, this person is responding to this, drawing from here, and all of those aspects. But what I could gather and accrue from this, the larger argument that Jayatīrtha and Madhavas are trying to do, is that because I can make a statement that there is the horn's hair is pink in color, whatever it is, there must be something like horn's hair. That is what seems to be the larger claim, right?
I'm not sure. So I wouldn't say that they say that there is a hare's horn. They would say that we have an awareness of a hare's horn that is based on our earlier experiences. So obviously we have to have an experience of hair and horn. And then this conspires with the rest of our faculties to produce an awareness of hare's horn. But the actual awareness is that part of the awareness, the hare's horn part of the awareness, doesn't have any objective correlate. So the hare's horn is just not a part of, Mādhva himself uses the term tattva. So tattva is the most comprehensive term in his metaphysics. It includes anything that is real, basically. And he says, so the Shashrunga is outside of that. It's not existent. It's just a fiction, basically. So I would say that, when I first read Mādhava works, I thought, okay, they want to give a kind of Meinongian subsistence argument. Or
Correct. I was thinking.
I thought that, and I even, when I started writing my PhD thesis, I used that. But then I realized that as I went on, somehow it doesn't. It's a purely cognitive existence. It doesn't actually, exist in any sense as part of reality. It's really a fiction. What does exist is that the properties, for example, of non-existence, asattva, is existent according to the Mādhavas. So you have these. So you have this real non-existence is attributed to something that's entirely fake, something that merely has a mental existence. Yeah.
So it's very close to Minogue in that sense. Minogue also says that existence or non-existence is a property that we can attribute.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. That is.
So then, if I mean, a question that I was thinking through, I mean, like, even though like I'm still trying to grapple the actual claim and their implications, one of the things that came to, I mean, was I was surprised by that, like, say, looks like most of this conversation that was happening in the 13th century and all of those things were not drawing from at least the possibility that there is imagination. I mean, like you mentioned abhavana to mention absences. But why is that most of this argument, like say, or even the criticisms of it, would say that, oh, no, this is just the illusion can be just because of your imagination. And that comes very much later, as you pointed out in the Matilal's distinction between objective, what did you say? Objective illusion and imaginative illusion.
Exactly, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So why is that the category of imagination or imaginative illusion didn't help in this 13th century, 15th century conversation, given that, like, say, I don't know, I mean, most of these people, or like, say, the people working on, like, say, literary analysis or aesthetics and all of this, which conveniently uses bhavana or other correlates of it. Why didn't they think that, okay, this is just my imagination, or the kid who has heard about it is just imagining things? Why is that part of the argument didn't come across?
Sure. I mean, so for the Mādhvas, I would say they do have, I mean, we can use the word imagination in their theory of illusions. I think for the Prābhākaras and the Naiyāyikas particularly, their main goal is to rule out the possibility of Buddhist or Advaita philosophy. So the Buddhists and the Advaitins both argue in some way that illusions show us where we can. There are cases where our imagination is very active. We can imagine things, we can think about things that aren't there in reality. And I would say the Nyāyikas and the Prābhākaras actually use an anti-disjunctivist stand in order to defend realism, which sounds a bit counterintuitive perhaps in the Western context. But so, I mean, the underlying argument is that illusions aren't so different from veridical perceptions after all. Each component of the illusion can be traced back to some component of reality. You have the idam. The idam part is just derived from the mother of pearl. The idam means this part, Then you have the Rajatatvam. Well, the Rajatatvam is universal, so it's also a part of reality. And the same for the Prābhākaras. They say there is no point to really cognize something that isn't there. And so I think the whole aim of these theories is to say that is to rule out the possibility that there is this imaginative response to reality where we conceive of something that isn't there, and to show that it's everything is just based on reality. And I think the Mādhvas really go against the grain in this respect, and they just say, okay, we can imagine things that aren't there. So what? They say, okay, just because we can imagine things sometimes that aren't there, it doesn't mean that, our entire reality is an illusion. And it just opens up the possibility. It doesn't mean that we, we have to follow it through. So they take a more disjunctivist stand. They say that veridical awarenesses and false ones are actually dissimilar to one another, but they argue that this has no real big metaphysical implications.
Yeah, quite complicated. Also, a follow-up question. You also mentioned that Jayatīrtha argues that, like, say, just because I can make a statement like a hare's horn doesn't exist, to make this even statement, I have to presume the existence or the awareness of hare's horn, right? Something like that. You mentioned Jayatīrtha holds a position like that. That reminded me of course, Bertrand Russell's famous, the present king of France is bald, and how he kind of tries to show that, like, yeah, if you take out the move from classical logic or simple logic to predicate logic, can solve all of these problems, right? I mean, like, so I'm interested that even that this question was there in the 13th, 14th century. How did it evolve in the Indian argumentative tradition? And so I just thought of highlighting that and just want to know your response. So yeah.
No, that's very interesting. Yeah, I think obviously with on denoting, and Bertrand Russell, I mean, he argues that if we use quantificational logic, we can see that statements like the present King of France is bold is, it actually conceals the grammar of the statement, conceals an existential premise that can be brought out by, as you say, using quantificational logic. And I think there's definitely more need for comparative work looking at the relationship between these different positions and how I think Matilal really started that. He started talking about particularly the Nyaya theory of error and comparing it to Russell's response. And so I think it's definitely interesting to look at the crossovers between these two things. But sorry, what was your, sorry, I kind of lost the track there. What was
I
your
mean, how
question?
did this, I mean, so no one critiqued Jayatīrtha's this kind of formulation, like referent formulation, like say, oh, if I have to even make a statement like this, then I should know that something like this should exist. So I wanted to know what responses it generated. Yeah.
So I think the Jayatīrtha's position is particularly that in order to make a statement, we must have an awareness of something. So unless, there's an implicit assumption there that unless I'm aware of something, I can't talk about it. So as soon as I say the statement is self-confuting, if I say one cannot experience X, whatever X is, then you're contradicting yourself, because in order to make the statement one cannot experience X, you already have had to have an awareness of X in the first place. Otherwise, how could you make a statement about it? And this is what Jayatīrtha says about illusion. So if you say, the Advaitins argue, well, if something is non-existent, we can't experience it. But then he turns around and says, well, you just said something, you just referred to something that doesn't exist. And you can, so presumably you can experience it. So it's kind of like this master argument that they see, and the Advaitins kind of got out of that by saying, okay, well, we can have, of course, we can have a verbal awareness.
Verbal awareness,
yeah. But that doesn't mean we can have really a true perceptual awareness of it. Those are two very different things, So the Advaitins do respond to it. The Naiyāyikas don't respond to it because they don't really respond to the Mādhvas at all, actually. I know it's this question. So the Mādhvas continue to write critiques of Nyāya, like Yayatīrtha, for example, in the 17th century, wrote a very detailed critique of Nyāya philosophy called the abhinavānyathākhyātivāda. But they never responded to it. So we don't get to see what the Nyāyikas would do in the case of this kind of argumentation.
Yeah, but do they counter-argue when Nyāyikas pointed out that there is verbal and perceptual awareness? How did Mādhvas responded to that? To this distinction?
The Mādhvas, well, they say, sure, this is a legitimate distinction, but still we can have perception like awarenesses of non-existent things. So we can, you can really have a perception of a shashashunga. And the Vyāsatīrtha gives this example of the kid, who doesn't know that hare's horns don't exist, hares can't have horns, and he says, well, I don't know, perhaps the kid sees something in the distance, and it looks like a little bunny rabbit, and it's got I don't know, something coming out of the top of its head. Perhaps there's a leaf sticking up behind its head. And then, why shouldn't that be a perception like awareness of a hare's horn? I take myself to be perceiving something, it feels like a perception. Obviously it's false, but it's still, a perception like awareness of a hare's horn. So
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, okay. Great. Yeah.
Krishna raised hand. Okay. Or maybe Joshua first. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, let Joshua go and then I'll go later.
Okay, sure.
Thank you for that talk, Michael. I had a doubt. According to Nyaya, there is a fallacy called Ashraya Siddhi. So where the inference would be Gagana Arvindam Surabhi. So do the Mādhvas, do they reject this fallacy altogether?
Yeah, basically, yeah, they in the Tarkatandava Vyāsatīrtha rejects this, and also aprasiddha visheshanatha. So the fallacy, as you say, the Gaganam Aravinda Surabhi, blah blah blah, whatever. So in that fallacy, the paksha is non-existent. The subject of the inference doesn't exist. In the in aprasiddha visheshanatha, the sadhya doesn't exist. So the thing you're trying to prove doesn't exist, but they are consistent, and they say no, we can have experiences of these, so, and we can make valid inferences. So they say, Vandya, you can make the inference that the Vyāsatīrtha navakta achetanatvād. So this is an example of what the Naiyāyikas would say is ashraya siddhi. But the Mādhva say, no, you can experience it, so these inferences are actually valid. So I think, they do categorically say that they're valid, and they reject the idea of ashraya siddhi or aprasiddha visheshanatha.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, Krishna, you wanted to ask.
Hi. Now, from whatever you presented, I wanted a clarification, which is that it looks like for the Mādhavas, all perception is determinate, if I'm not mistaken. And I wanted to know how does one unpack, if you can tell us how one unpacks that idea or claim. Is it that all perception is determinate? One way of doing it is to say it's determinate in its fine-grainedness, right? I mean, yeah, so I can kind of perceive different kinds of fine-grainedness in a color. And that way it's determinate. Or is there another way of determinacy of perception that is at work? Because when you say perception determinate, that's where I'm going. But maybe there's something else you have in mind. Yeah.
No, sure. I think this is a very, very important debate between the Mādhavas and the Advaitins, obviously, and also with the Nyāyāyikas. So the Advaitins and the Nyāyāyikas believe that there is such a thing as indeterminate, non-determinate perception, and this is a nirvikalpaka pratyaksha. So this is just the apprehension of a bare particular without, the Nyāyāyikas say it's not a matter of attributing some property towards something else, So a determinate perception is one where you attribute something to something else. So you say of this piece of mother of pearl that it is silver. You say of this thing over here that it's a house plant. You attribute some quality towards it. So there's a visheshana bhava. So there's a relation of qualifier. You have the qualifier, which is whatever you're attributing, and then you have the prakara is usually the word used for that. So you have the prakara, the thing you're attributing, and then you have the vishesha, which is the thing you're attributing it to. And so the Mādhavas, the Naiyāyikas and the Advaitins both say that there is a different type of perception to this. There's just the apprehension of the bare particular. The Mādhavas reject this, and they say that no, all, as you say, all perception, all awareness is determinate, in the sense that it attributes, some qualifier, something to something else. It says something about something else, So they reject, and I think this is partly because, mainly probably because of the conflict with the Advaitins, I mean, the Advaitins obviously argue that Brahman itself, the experience of Brahman that we get, that allows us to be liberated from samsara, is indeterminate. It's a kind of akhanda awareness. And the Mādhavas reject this completely, and they say all awareness is determinate. So it has the character, it has the character of attributing some property to something that. That actually possesses it. And that's usually the term used for, is nirvikalpaka and savikalpaka. I mean, this is common now in modern ontological works to translate them as determinate and indeterminate, or conceptual and non-conceptual, for example. So.
I mean, I have a follow-up question. I mean, sure. So you're saying that for the Mādhavas, therefore, there's always some kind of predication such that you can't perceive just the property without the substance that in which it inheres. Now, but I was thinking if there can be other kinds of indeterminacy, in the sense that even though they might be this kind of predication or subsumption or whatever you want to call it between substance and property. But I could still have different attitudes towards it, or attitude of doubt, or attitude of confirmation, or maybe some of them are veridical by itself, but some of them are not veridical. And so is it possible that we could have indeterminacy at the perceptual level, given what Mādhva's philosophy says, that you could understand indeterminacy in another way, in terms of how, even though you have this predication, some forms of substance properties are inherently veridical, and some forms of, or some kinds of substance property may not be veridical, and therefore you could have, you could have kind of a backdoor entry for an understanding of illusion, or for an agreement, admission.
I mean, the Advaitins, they have, interestingly, there's anirvachaniyata, indeterminacy, is a term for their own theory of illusion, So they argue that ultimately there is something indeterminate about perceptual illusions. So when we try to explain them, when we try to categorize them, different attempts break down. And so this this indeterminacy theory is that you can't really explain perceptual illusions. If you assume that the object of the illusion really exists, you can't explain why later it gets sublated, So clearly the object can't exist, otherwise it's, otherwise we wouldn't realize this awareness we had was false. On the other hand, you can't say it's non-existent either, because if you say it's non-existent, then, as I said in the talk, how can you perceive it at all? How can you have an awareness at all? And their ultimate conclusion is that perceptual awareness is indeterminate. It's simply inexplicable for this reason, So, and the Advaitins' goal is to really show that our explanatory efforts to account for perceptual illusion fail. That's one, indeterminacy thesis that's very important in this context.
Yeah, I just thought I'll just jump in, Krishna. Also, there is one other thing which I think you were pointing out, right? Like doubt and illusion. So I just wanted to kind of say that for Indian philosophers, I mean, if I'm right, just Michael, I hope I'm right. So as far as my knowledge goes, that for them, illusion is not doubt. It's a clear-cut distinction. Why? Because doubt is where you can't decide about an object, right? Illusion is not like that. You decide it for a moment. So it's like, oh, that's a silver. You have that decision, right? So you determine that it is something. So in that way, if you say that it is a nishchaya, in that way, it's definitely different from doubt. Doubt is something like whether it is a silver or not. So these people are more worried about this illusionary kind of thing where, they separate it from doubt.
No, I was wondering about these kinds of, duck rabbit thing where it's not, you can interpret it in different ways, but it's just that the perceptual field itself isn't determinate in the sense that, it can go this way or that way. So, I'm saying there is quote unquote doubt within the perceptual field, which is not a product of the perceiver's inference. Yeah.
Yes, but that is from a third perspective, right? I mean, what do you call this? God's perspective, in the sense, once you are aware that you were in illusion, then you must say, oh, was there a silver or not? Something.
No. You have a point, but I was also looking at the duck rabbit illusion, right? Which is that, the same thing can be a duck or a rabbit. So I was wondering, and it's not necessarily inferential doubt. Yeah, but it's
you see a thing, and then once if you have a doubt, it is something like, is it a duck or a rabbit, isn't it? But then when you have an illusion, say maybe it is in reality it is a duck, but then when it is an illusion, you will think that it's a rabbit.
I see, but But I mean, I'm saying both can be correct. I mean, duck and rabbit both can be correct in the duck and rabbit thing.
I'm
Yeah,
not
but
sure of this.
sure. Okay. Anyway, yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking aloud. But
Sure.
anyway, I think yeah. Sorry.
We'll go to Mallikarjun and then again. Yeah, Mallikarjun, you want to say something?
Yeah, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, hi, Michael. Thanks for the talk. It was difficult for me to follow, I think, because it's getting back to Indian philosophy after a lot of days. So just if I can just summarize, the main argument for Mādhvas is against the Advaitins, because Advaitins hold anirvachaniya, and that is sort of antithetical to the realist position. And from there we go to Prābhākara, because for Prābhākara, error is not an illusion. And then the Mādhvas and Nyāyikas, they have to argue against Prābhākara, because they want to say, yes, there is illusion, but they have to argue against Prābhākara that there is illusion, and Prābhākara doesn't grant illusion. And then Nyaya would say that silver in the illusion, silver is real, just that it is not there. Whereas Mādhvas would argue that the illusory silver does not exist at all. Did I get that right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's a very accurate summary of the different views.
Now you mentioned also one thing, that there's a difference between sort of two kinds of theories of error, where one is the sort of individual kind, which I'm not sure who agrees to that. Nyāyikas, I think, they to a natural kind, that the entire sort of silver hood sort of manifests in the individual this thing. I was just wondering, what are the implications of both of these sort of theories of error, to grant one and not the other? And another question was, I mean, how do you think of like, I was just wondering about, I'm not sure who it was, is it Parmenides or somewhere in sort of Greek thought, where, like, non-existence cannot even be thought of. I mean, this is very different from, I mean, I was just thinking, like Minogian argument that the properties of non-existent things, properties of non-existence can still be perceived. Sort of, this seems very difficult, given what Parmenides or someone would say, that it cannot be even thought of. I mean, if something is non-existent.
Yeah, sure. I think that's that's a nice summary of the different views you gave. And coming to this question of what the implications of the two different versions of the theory that Jayatīrtha ascribes to the Naiyāyikas. So, like you say, you have in one there is the mother of pearl, and we attribute the natural kind or the universal silverhood to it. And in the other, we identify the mother of pearl as being a piece of silver that obviously doesn't exist here and now, but exists in a different, in a different location, perhaps in the silversmith's shop. So I think this has probably, the first theory, the one with the universals or natural kinds, is more easily defensible, So, the Nyāyikas believe that we can perceive universals. So as I perceive, I don't know, this plant, I also have an experience of the natural kind planthood through my perceptual faculties. It's perhaps easier to argue that this universal, that we're misattributing, is perceptually available through some kind of perception at the time that we're having the illusion, and it sounds perhaps more plausible than to say that, there is this remotely existing piece of silver that my perceptual faculties are somehow in contact with, I mean, we certainly have, nobody would doubt that we have some kind of an awareness of the silver. or some kind of an awareness that's inspired by the silver, but to believe that it somehow becomes infused into the perception through some remote process is kind of implausible. So I think probably when people talk about the Nyaya theory, they usually talk about the natural kind version of it. They don't talk about the individual silver version of it. And I think that one of the implications is that if you assume the individual kind of version of the Nyaya theory, then it becomes easier to critique it for Jayatīrtha. It's easier for Jayatīrtha to turn around and say, what does the remote existence of the silver have to do with it? And I think it's also more consistent with the Mādvas with their rejection of universals. It's more reflective of the fact that the Mādvas are nominalists, or that at least that they reject universals. So it also reflects a much wider view of reality, according to which there are no repeatable properties, natural kinds, and so on. It's just a matter of bare individuals. And that's an aspect of the Mādva philosophy that comes again from the debate with the Advaitins, I think. They are ultimately radical pluralists. They want to argue that there are no overlapping categories in reality, no more general kind of existence or being underneath it all. There are just bare particulars. So that is, I think, is connected with that also.
Okay. Now, Michael, I just wanted to, Varun has some questions just quickly. So the thing is, as you explained, that Mādvas are putting together two kinds of things in this category of non-existing things, whatever it is. That is, one is things like hare's horn, which we never had any kind of perception that, okay, there is a hare's horn. We never had it nobody had it. So this is one kind of non-existent thing. And then there is this one, which is something like this, this silver, which for a moment we had this kind of a perception that, oh, this is silver, right? So my point is, Mādvas seem to be putting these two things together. So are they kind of claiming that, because obviously non-dualists and the other people definitely make a distinction between these two, because, as you pointed out, but then I wanted to make it clear that then according to Mādhva, there is no difference between these two kinds?
I would say perhaps the only difference is whether someone has mistaken them or not. So in theory, any non-existent thing along the lines that we've been talking about, a shashashrunga, the silver, that's the real piece of mother of pearl, can become an object of illusion. It's just that it just so happens that perhaps the shashashrunga hasn't yet become an object of illusion for anybody. But as soon as you have two real things and you're kind of mixing them together, it becomes possible to imagine a situation in which somebody would mistake it for something else. So they would say, no, there is no distinction between those two things. Really, they're both just the same. It's the only thing that becomes problematic when I think about it is the case of impossible things. Like the Nyāyasudhā. Could somebody ever really have a real perception of a Nyāyasudhā? As soon as you understand the terms, that this is impossible. It's just a logical contradiction. But as I say, Indian philosophers, they don't generally distinguish so sharply between these two things. So they all tend to get, pushed together into this one category. And perhaps I would like to ask a modern Mādhva philosopher, about what they think about the Nyāyasudhā situation. How can we have, perceptual awareness of Nyāyasudhā? I don't know how they'd argue that.
Yes, sure. I was also kind of trying to look at whether do they have this distinction between impossible things and some natural, something like hare's horn which is not kind of not possible, but then it's not impossible in that sense. So. Varun has some questions.
Only if Michael doesn't mind. It's almost been 1.5 hours. It's probably at 6:30 in the morning. So sorry, we are going on asking question after question. We have all had our breakfast, coffee, and everything. So I'm really sorry for this. But the question that I'm asking is not to do exactly with the content of your present talk. It has to do with the methodological question in that sense. And I'm just interested in asking any Indian philosopher I meet about this. So hope, yeah, I mean, like I come across right here. So say, for example, you presented a larger argument that was happening in the 13th, 15th century, and you are at present working on it, and you're also aware that, like, say, we as in like the current set of philosophers, I mean, probably Indian philosophers, also have certain other um, concepts and certain other baskets of concepts readily available. Say, for example, I can understand what Jayatīrtha and his peers would not have had is a clear-cut, probably a distinction of, like, say, first level logic, second order logic, or like, say, a faculty of imagination that is there in our cognitive. All of this clear cut, which we take for granted in the present discourse, probably because of the sciences and various other developments in this one. Uh, how would you proceed if, like, say, for example, you want to still do Mādhva philosophy? I mean, still want to be in that tradition, still want to be in that system, to say, forget tradition, still want to be in that system of school of philosophy, but want to draw from other things, like, say, probably, like, say, contemporary science, or I'm not any way suggesting naturalizing Madhava philosophy. I would not anyway recommend that. But what would be your boundary lines? I mean, like, will you do it? How will you do it? What would be the interesting way? Because this is one of the ways I struggle with it, in the sense that even though I'm not an Indian philosophy scholar, one of the ways I want to do it is I get stuck, like, oh, can I borrow something from somewhere and put it here? Or would it be considered blasphemous from the core group? So how would you navigate this? Yeah.
No, it's a really interesting question. I mean, so I think, as soon as you even start to translate these texts, into a modern language, you inevitably get involved with, making philosophical judgments. I mean, introducing, as you say, terms that are alien to this discourse. As soon as you just start to interpret it, you have to do this. You have to select. I mean, there are different ways of doing it, but the vast majority of people who work on Indian philosophy just draw, their terms, the conceptual apparatus, that they use to translate it. They draw it from contemporary philosophy, obviously, and it's in the case of my area of the field, it's mainly contemporary analytic philosophy. As was done by Matilal and Ingalls, and Jatindranath Mohanty and so on. They quite freely drew on analytic philosophy in order to express this. I mean, I don't know, for the modern day Mādhva scholars, I think there's an increasing interest in Western philosophy, and I think that many of them are more open to applying, contemporary concerns and concepts, and trying to represent Mādhva philosophy in those terms, I mean, Krishnamurti Sharma, B.N.K. Sharma, the great historian and philosopher of Mādhva, the Mādhva tradition in the 20th century, he also, drew fairly liberally on different ideas from theology and also philosophy in his works, So among the Mādhvas, there is, there's a tendency to do this. I mean, as to how and to what extent it's appropriate, I mean, there's obviously a line between authenticity and really representing these ideas accurately and trying to put them into conversation with modern, with modern day philosophy. I mean, I don't do that so much myself. In my works, I'm mainly concerned with trying to reconstruct Vyāsatīrtha's arguments and ideas, his own arguments and ideas. Because that in itself is a massive task. I mean, he's such a complex philosopher. In terms of. So the work of actually, going out and comparing that with contemporary philosophy and perhaps enriching the discussion using terms from and concepts from contemporary philosophy is something that I see perhaps happening later. But yeah, I mean,
So what I could gather from your response is that, like, say, the current set of tasks of the quote unquote contemporary Mādhva scholars would be exhausting in itself to make available the older text in the modern parlance, is it? So that is what you're saying. I mean, that in itself is very exhausting and not all encompassing, but very time consuming. And that is the first step that is required to even think about, like, say, how will I take Jayatīrtha's argument with Nyaya and provide a new critique of Nyaya, drawing from still being committed to Jayatīrtha's commitments, I mean, like ontological and metaphysical commitments, but drawing from something else and using it to critique Nyaya. So yeah, probably the better way to articulate my question or my query would be that, like, say, how to contemporarily develop Mādhva philosophy, develop further Mādhva philosophy. I mean, do you think is it possible, or in what ways it is possible? Apart from, of course, translating and making it available and all of those things.
I think it's essential. I mean, I think the Mādhva tradition has to now exists obviously in the modern world, and as they, I mean, just of course they've done a very good job of making their ideas, their texts available to everybody, and they also there's still a lot of translation work to do, as I say, but as they participate more and more in this Anglophone world where they're discussing these ideas, they do have to develop responses to different things. One of them is the Mādhvas are really strongly associated with Tāratamya, the idea of hierarchy. So according to this doctrine, the individual souls all exist in this kind of hierarchy, they're in an ethical hierarchy where some souls are better than others. And this persists in liberation. And, Mādhva philosophers tell me that this is, this is one of the most difficult aspects of their philosophy to present to outsiders. So I think they are really confronting these questions of how do we present a doctrine like this? Do we have to modify it in some way? Do we have to go back to Mādhva himself and to actually reinterpret, to look carefully at what he's saying, to be able to present this accurately to modern viewers? And how do we, and that might, I think for them that might, entail a process of creative adaptation, a process that's still really rooted in the study, of their texts and the close study of their texts, but also which also, as you say, develops it and uses vocabulary and concepts from contemporary philosophy to perhaps revise and to reimagine this doctrine. And so, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. Yeah.
Okay. I just would add one thing. It's already late. Sorry, just half a minute. It's that whatever Varun you're asking is really a difficult task. And then I would say that, but one thing. Even when these philosophers, like imagine that Buddhists and Mādhvas and Advaitins are arguing, right? Certain concepts, certain words, they have their own meaning. First, they will define it in the sense satta, existence. Satta itself is different for different people. So in that way, already this problem existed. I mean, for an Advaitin to answer sattas, a question related to satta, which is raised by a Madhyamika Shunyavadi or a Buddhist or an Mādhva would require him to define his own terms and then talk. So in that way, it is similar for Western philosophy if we consider. That's what, like, because I'm working so much into this comparative philosophy. So, but I would say one thing is to define and then take the term which really which goes very close to the idea of Indian philosophy, and then define it and then tell the difference. That this is where it differs from that concept, and then we use this term precisely in this way. And that's what became Matilal. Everybody showed the way, and they were the ones who showed the way, like how at least we can go ahead. And then try to answer that what are the questions in contemporary philosophy, whether you can apply or not.
Yeah.
Great. So it's already too much time. So thanks a lot, Michael. See you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. And thank you for your questions. It was very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
Okay. Bye-bye. Take care. Ciao.